Your Humanities Half Hour is brought to you by the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.
Hafidei Zantiro, welcome to Your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry. It's my pleasure to have in studio today molecular anthropologist and science writer Dr. Miguel Vilar, project manager for National Geographic's Genographic project. Miguel, welcome to the Northern Mariana Islands.
Oh, thank you, Catherine. A pleasure to be here.
Well, I hate to put you in the hot seat, but I know there's a lot of people out there interested in what you have to talk about today, which is something related to the origins of the Chamorro people. And we're very pleased to have you in Saipan this month to talk about your project, which is, your talk was entitled Researching the Origins and Genetic Distinctiveness of Chamorros, a Biparental Analysis. Now, that's a big title. Break that down to layman's terms for us.
I've been working in this part of the world through samples collected from the 90s and early 2000s as part of my graduate work, and back then we were studying Chamorros because we had read that they were archaeologically distinct to other populations. So we wanted to see if what we knew about the Chamorros from archaeology and language also could be seen through the genetics. And so this analysis now is what I call kind of high resolution. It looks at as much as we possibly can genetically, and sort of breaks down the origins of the Chamorros by looking at the deep maternal line, the deep paternal line, and sort of also a summary of any individual person, how much components they have from neighboring populations, Southeast Asia, Oceania. And sort of that's why it's called biparental. We're looking originally, the first test was only looking at the maternal side, which is very informative. Now we can sort of look from both sides, and what we're finding, and we'll talk about it more later, is that yes, Chamorros are quite unique population.
Now, this project, I understand, started or is conducted through the University of Guam. How did it go about?
Well, so I had done work previously on samples collected by my advisor, academic advisor, from the 90s and early 2000s, and we published a paper based on that work in 2012, and then I found out about the Marianas History Conference that happened in 2013. So I attended and I gave a talk, and I came prepared to interview and take samples of Chamorros that were in Guam. So it was a visit I had for about 3 or 4 days to Guam, and I worked through university. I had a contact in the biology department there. I had a chance to meet President Underwood, and they helped me sort of facilitate a sort of a 2 or 3 day activity where I met several people, up to 85 people, and enrolled them in the program, the Genographic project actually. So it was through that project that we were able to enroll, like I said, 85 people, and now we're coming back with some results.
How did you determine which people you would take the sampling from?
Well, we began by working with a local professor at the University of Guam, who himself is Chamorro. He helped me sort of set up a table in an activity that we had, opening a market actually in downtown. I believe it was in downtown Tamuning. And then that was the first day. We enrolled about 20 or 30 people, and then we actually opened it up through the university, opened it up to students, opened it up to the community. We made an announcement on the radio, and we enrolled about 40 or 50 more the next day by setting up sort of a place where they could come and meet with us, and I could tell them what the interests were, and we're looking at the origins of Chamorros. We never turned anybody away, even if you were of different ancestry, but we said we have some data from the 90s. We have a high resolution capability now. We want to learn more, and people were lining up. We were there for about 3 hours straight of taking samples and enrolling participants, and it was very successful.
So I remember even back in my Northern Marianas history class in high school, there was always a discussion, if not a debate, about how much real Chamorros or original Chamorro blood pre-European contact still exists among our Chamorro people today. Can this project help answer that, and does it help answer that?
This project can help answer that, and I said help. It doesn't completely answer it, but I think it can help answer it. So going back to the original test that we were doing in the 90s and early 2000s, we looked simply at the maternal line. It's called mitochondrial DNA, and it's inherited through a mother. She inherited from her mother, and so forth. So it's a deep maternal line. And what we found there was that Chamorros were quite unique, and they were quite distinct to other populations. Now, fast forward to where we are now, we can actually look at the deep maternal line, but we can do the same thing with the paternal line. Look at the Y chromosome DNA that comes from a father who inherits from the grandfather, who came from the great-grandfather, and so forth. And a third thing we can do with the DNA is sort of look at the rest of the genome that you inherited from all your ancestors, and sort of give you a breakdown, any individual participant, how much DNA they carry that is from different regions, whether it originates in East Asia, islands, Southeast Asia, Oceania. And so, in a sense, we're looking at three different parts of the DNA to sort of give you a picture, and then to be able to really tell you whether what we're seeing is Chamorro, we then need to also look outside. And we've worked with some people of Filipino ancestry. We've worked with a few people in other parts neighboring, but we haven't worked very much in Carolines. We haven't worked in Indonesia very much. So we suspect that that's sort of what the neighboring populations are. We know that the neighboring populations. We suspect that's maybe where some of the genetic makeup comes with the Chamorros. But in order to really tell you somebody's Chamorro, we would have to kind of look at the comparative populations. But throughout the markers that we already see, we can tell that they're quite distinct. And basically, the more people we enroll, the more we can tell you about that.
So what does the project tell us about the settlement of the Chamorros in the Northern Marianas, or in the Marianas, since, of course, you conducted your studies in Guam? What kind of patterns do we see emerging?
Well, what we see is that the Chamorros have a very unique, like I said, genetic composition, I'd say, and it looks to originate, we think, in island Southeast Asia. Archaeologists suggested that the earliest Chamorros probably arrived in the Marianas maybe 4,000 years ago, 3,500 years ago. And then we see lineages, these maternal lineages I mentioned, the mitochondrial DNA, that are approximately between 2,000 and 5,000 years old. So the genetics seem to match almost identically with the archaeology. And these lineages are not lineages that are very common in the rest of Oceania. They're not common in Micronesia or Polynesia or even Melanesia. They do appear in island Southeast Asia. And if you look more deeply at these specific lineages, there are groups we call haplogroups, which are groups of related lineages. Haplogroup is the word. So there's two specifically ones, E1 and E2, and those are more commonly found in eastern Indonesia. So it looks like the Chamorros have a deeper connection to that part of the world, and they're also found in the Philippines, and some older lineages are also found in Taiwan. But the ones that we think are that seem to be the source of the Chamorros, seem to have originated in eastern Indonesia. So that is one thing that we've learned by looking at the deep paternal line, and that's not exactly the same that what archaeology was told us. Archaeology said that we thought some of the first migrants were coming possibly from the Philippines, and what we see is that the source of the genetics may have come just from south of the Philippines, what we think eastern Indonesia, and some may have gone back towards the Philippines, and some may have come kind of northwest into the Marianas. I think that sort of summarizes that part of it. Secondly, in addition to this large E group that I mentioned, there's another group we categorize as B, and I can go into more detail what the letters mean. The B group is found throughout Oceania. It's actually very common in throughout Micronesia. It's very common in Melanesia, Polynesia, and it's also quite common in island Southeast Asia. It's the one group that we've known since the 90s that we associate with what they call the Austronesian expansion. The Austronesian expansion is sort of a movement that archaeologists have theorized came out of Taiwan through the Philippines and expanded. One wave expanded into Marianas, another wave into Melanesia and out to Polynesia. That lineage that we find in Chamorros occurs in about 10% of Chamorros. However, the one of the Chamorros, again, is unique. It's not the same to anything in Indonesia or the Philippines or anywhere in Oceania. It's unique, but it's descendant from this kind of wave of expansion that happened.
So what does that what does that theorize about their migration pattern?
So we think that since it's unique, it's unique and it's actually a single lineage with no variation. So that the fact that it's unique, it suggests to us that it really must have originated some time ago. But the fact that it's only one lineage with no variation, it can't be that old. And so we estimated by looking at the surrounding populations how old they were. This lineage we estimated to be somewhere around 1,000 years old, and we attribute that to maybe a separate migration. It's not nearly as old as the ones I mentioned earlier, the E's that we know coming from eastern Indonesia. This one is about 1,000 years old, and we theorize it arrived separately, so possibly in a second migration. And this second migration could have been the one that introduced the Lati, could have been the one that introduced the rice that we don't see in the pre-Lati culture. So the genetics is showing, supporting the theory that there were two different migrations, in one about 3,500 years ago and another one possibly 1,000 years ago.
And that's also a theory, as I understand, that's been held by anthropologists based on their study, correct?
Right. It's an older theory, but it had never been sort of confirmed. And I must stress that I don't think genetics is confirming it. It's sort of resuggesting it because we see two different patterns among the Chamorros. So it sort of brings it back up. It had been suggested earlier because we have this sort of new wave of technology with the Lati stones and the rice that is not found anywhere else in Oceania. And it seems to have a tie back to island Southeast Asia. I believe the Marianas is the only area of Oceania that has rice or has any cereal, and we know that came from island Southeast Asia, and it's also the Latis are unique to the Marianas, and similar structures have been found in the Philippines and Indonesia. So again, suggesting that may have been a source of that technology.
Interesting. You mentioned the first part of the study was maternal.
Right.
And the second was paternal. Is there something that changed in the study of genetics during that time that made one come before the other?
No, the capability to do the paternal test has been around almost as long as the maternal test. But what we can do now is we can do them both in the same test. And that's what we were able to do with these participants, the 85 Chamorro participants that joined us in 2013. So if I were to look strictly at the paternal side, we see very similar patterns of surely one migration, probably dating about 4,000 years ago, and a separate one that may have come in around the same time as the second lineage. So with the paternal line that now we've been able to analyze, seems to support what we had seen with the maternal line.
So what is the significance of the finding of your research? Does it make any significant changes, or does it more seem to support existing theories?
I think it seems to support existing theories, but the interesting part is that there were several different theories because nobody was quite sure. So it seems to support, I think, the theory that the connection is possibly stronger to eastern Indonesia. Doesn't eliminate the connection to the Philippines, but it seems like the deeper roots come from eastern Indonesia, at least prehistoric. And in a sense, it seems to again accentuate what we knew, what we had established through archaeology and through linguistics, that the Chamorros, again, are quite unique. They're very different to their neighbors in the FSM, the Federal States of Micronesia. They're different to their neighbors in Polynesia, in Melanesia, and even different to the Philippines.
Well, we're speaking today with molecular anthropologist and science writer Dr. Miguel Vilar. He's also the project manager for National Geographic's Genographic project. And we'll be back with more after this break.
Half a day, this is Eulalia Villagomez of the Northern Marianas Humanities Council. Did you know that you can donate up to $5,000 to the Humanities Council through the CNMI Education Tax Credit Program? Donations from individuals and corporations qualify and can be used to offset your local wage and salary tax, BGRT, and earnings tax. Call our office at 235-4785 to see how you can support humanities programs in our community and obtain a tax credit for your donation. Thank you, and Sizus Masi.
Welcome back to your Humanities Half Hour. We're speaking to Dr. Miguel Vilar, a molecular anthropologist and science writer, and also project manager for National Geographic's Genographic project, specifically here in the Marianas this month to talk about researching the origins and genetic distinctiveness of Chamorros, a biparental analysis. Miguel, now that this project is almost complete, although we do hope that you'll expand it to the Northern Marianas, and we can talk about that later, but what is the real application of what you have discovered through this work?
Well, what we discovered is that, in essence, we're all related. We're all closely related. I've stressed earlier that the Chamorros are quite unique, but they're unique within the greater context of the community. So the project originally began in 2005, and when it launched from National Geographic, we kind of contracted laboratories and research scientists in 12 different locations throughout the world. And after about 10, now going 11 years, the great summary of the project has been that we're all related to one another. The difference between somebody from sub-Saharan Africa, somebody from Japan, somebody from Australia, or Chile, for that matter, is minimal. But what we've been able to also find is that as the humans expanded throughout the globe, they moved and they acquired sort of changes in their DNA and carried those changes to different parts of the world. So we were able to not only show that we're all kind of closely related, we all come originally from Africa, and we're all closely related to each other, but our ancestors took different paths. And it's those movements, those mutations that happen in our DNA and those movements they took that really accounts for the variations that we see today throughout the world. So it's a nice kind of summary project now that we're...
Now, I understand your field work has taken you to not only the Pacific, East Africa, the Caribbean, Mesoamerica. Is there... what has that experience been like, especially in genetics? I mean, you're looking at such detail, but as you said, humans are so similar. So do you ever have like aha moments when you're looking at human genes in these many areas, or even the culture? You've been now here to the Marianas, and anything that strikes you as familiar or anything that's amazing. I guess you spend a lot of time looking at details, but in your work, do you ever encounter anything that is amazing about humans?
Well, I do find things that sort of give me eureka moments or aha moments. And it's funny because you think of an anthropologist like myself discovering a new skeleton or finding something unusual in sort of Indiana Jones style. That
I was just thinking of Indiana Jones when you said
well,
that.
My Indiana Jones moment is in front of a computer looking at sort of different colors that codes for different mutations. But going back to what you mentioned, my work in the Caribbean, especially, and the work I've been carrying out with Chamorros in Micronesia, is that I am originally from Puerto Rico, and I know Puerto Rican culture quite well. I grew up there, although I live now in mainland United States. I did a project similar to the one I did in the Chamorros. I did it in Puerto Rico, and when we started doing this kind of more high resolution test where we can sort of break down the components of any individual participant into how much European they carry, how much Native American, how much African, how much East Asian, Puerto Rico had a sort of an interesting signature. But then when I started looking at the similar markers in Chamorros, we found a different pattern. But if you take both places, specifically let's look at Guam and Puerto Rico, they have a similar history. Since Spanish colonization, they became part of the United States after the Spanish-American War. So I started stepping back and having an aha moment is I'm looking at all these genetic markers on a computer, but yet if you step back, the history of these two places in the opposite side of the world are very similar. So what happened culturally, what happened historically that sort of shaped the different patterns that we see in these two places? And coming from Puerto Rico, when I first visited Guam, and now here in Saipan, I almost feel like a connection that the Chamorros and people from Puerto Rico, in a sense, have that they sort of share a similar history. And sort of that was a personal connection to me when I started looking at the genetics, that they could unite these two places, opposite sides of the world, because they share a common history, and the patterns, not necessarily the deep lineages. Puerto Rico doesn't share any lineages, to say, with Southeast Asia, but the history, the colonial history, the cultural situation that there is now has had an effect on the genetics, and it's sort of a way to kind of bring things together.
I have to ask, I'm sorry, the first thing I wanted to say is that I think one of the most important questions a person asks themselves, even if not consciously, unconsciously, is who am I? And really your work is helping answer that question for some of our people here in the Northern Marianas, which is very significant. And you've come all the way from the other side of the world to help answer that question for us. What I wanted to ask was, how does a boy from Puerto Rico grow up to become the project manager of National Geographic's Genographic project? Tell us a little bit about your career path, and maybe we can plant some seeds here so that we can also contribute to this type of work.
Sure. So I knew I was going to study science. I was very science oriented, and in college discovered something called anthropology. And as a freshman in college, I never heard of it, but I found it very fascinating because it sort of brought together my interest, my curiosity in science, but also my interest in history and in understanding where we came from. And having come from Puerto Rico. Your identity is very, very important to you, whether you associate with the Taíno culture, which was the indigenous culture of the Caribbean, or you associate with Spain, or you associate with the U.S. Every individual person associates differently, but the concept of where we came from and your cultural identity is something that everybody in Puerto Rico has and struggles with, in a sense. So when I started studying anthropology, I sort of brought my experience as a young child growing up in Puerto Rico, and then science came back to it. I was always interested in evolution, where we came from, understanding where humans came from. But then I could bring that together with my interest in sort of where we come as a people, in a sense. And in molecular anthropology, sort of brought things together. So I really didn't discover molecular anthropology until I was about to graduate, undergraduate. And there was a paper published in 1987 then essentially completely reshaped the field of anthropology. It's called Mitochondrial DNA and Human Evolution. And it was the first paper that really proved that all of humans were really closely related to each other. It coined the term mitochondrial Eve. There was a woman who lived in Africa about 150,000 years ago that we also are related to. And that sort of brought it all home together with me when I read that paper. But anyway, after undergraduate, I did some science writing. I knew I wanted to sort of continue to do science, but be able to convey science to a greater community. I couldn't see myself doing just strictly lab work. Well, lo and behold, after about 2 or 3 years of doing some science writing in various different magazines throughout New York City, Maryland, I was moving up and down the East Coast, I really decided that I truly did want to be the scientist. I didn't want to be writing about it. So I went back to grad school and joined a program in molecular anthropology. And I worked with a man named Dr. Koji Lum, who was one of the first people who worked in Micronesia. And he introduced me to Micronesia. He brought me to Melanesia. I traveled with him to Vanuatu. Never made it to the Marianas back then. And then when I started traveling in the Pacific, I started kind of falling in love with it. I realized how beautiful it was. It reminded me of home, but it reminded me with just a different feel, a Pacific feel. It's kind of hard to describe that you don't see in the Caribbean. So when I got my PhD in 2010, I started looking for postdoc positions to continue to do research, and there was one at the University of Pennsylvania with a man who was already working with the Genographic project, and he was in charge of working, sort of leading the project for North America. I was a sort of second man. I was his postdoc, and I was there for about 4 years, and led the project in Puerto Rico. Started a new project in Mexico. Started a project in the Dominican Republic. But in the back of my mind, I said, I do want to go back to the Pacific, which I'd done in graduate school. So I approached National Geographic and said, there's this conference happening in 2013 in Guam. Can I go there? They invited me to present, but I need some funding. And National Geographic said, sure, here. So I was in Guam about 3 or 4 days only. We had enrolled 85 participants. Some people read a blog that I write. I read a blog for National Geographic about the Genographic project. One of the first ones I ever wrote was on my work with the Chamorros in 2013. I think it was circulated over here in the Marianas, and people read it and started emailing me and wanted to work. They say, I have Chamorro ancestry, can I participate? And so at that point, I wasn't going to come back. Not be able to come back, but I sort of pointed them in the direction of where they could buy a kit, where they could participate on their own. I knew I wanted to come back. When I was here in 2013, I promised that people would come back and bring results. And that's sort of where I am now. I'm back here in the Marianas to return results to some of the participants from 2013, and to also kind of motivate some people here in the Northern Marianas to learn about the project, to go into the field of not only biology, but it's also anthropology, a field that, when I was 15 or even 18, I had never heard of. It was when I first went to college. And I think that's the case for most people. They don't even know what the word anthropology means. It means the study of humans. And it's fascinating. It really is fascinating, and you can do it through studying languages. You can do it through studying artifacts and archaeology, studying culture, or the way I do it, through genetics.
You had mentioned, and this is really exciting, that there is a possibility of expanding your genetic sampling to the Northern Marianas if, as you put it, we express interest. So we just need you to let us know how we can express interest in the appropriate manner so that we can get you to come and also include us here in Saipan Tinin Rota.
Yeah, I would like to. I certainly would like to. Like I said, the chance to come to Guam in 2013 kind of presented itself, and at that time the project was starting to wind down, but still pretty active. At this point, the project is not complete, but it is even more winding down. We've sampled about 750,000 people throughout the world. Not only people that we went in looking for to participate to kind of to fill in the gaps and paint the picture of humanity, but also people who bought their own kits. But Northern Marianas, we have never sampled. We have never worked here. Usually we would need to have sort of a contact that helps us set it up, whether it's a biologist or an archaeologist, or sometimes it could be a community leader that has interest and it has the motivation, and sometimes takes funding because it's still it's still somewhat expensive to do. It costs somewhat about $100 to run each participant, so it requires some fundraising to make it happen. But I would be interested in working with, like I said, a local person, a local archaeologist, a local anthropologist, or a community leader, and returning here, say in 6 months or a year from now, and growing the project into the Northern Marianas. That would be fantastic.
That would be fantastic. So if people want to get in touch with you, share with us how they can do so, also where they might be able to access information on our discussion today, and any final thoughts you have.
All right. Well, the easiest way to contact me is through the Genographic project webpage. That's www.genographic.com. That's GENOGRAPHIC, genographic.com. And if you look at resources for educators, resources for scientists, you'll find my name there, and you'll find my phone number and email contact, and I'm usually pretty good at returning emails. So that would be the easiest way to contact me. What was the second part of the question? Oh, I'm sorry.
Where can people find your presentation or your research if they're interested in hearing more, and your final thoughts?
Yes. So to learn more about the research, we have within that page we have a news section, and actually one of the first ones is about my work in the Chamorros here. When I first came and sampled in 2013, we whenever we publish a paper, Genographic puts it online for people. But sometimes not every paper makes it on, so if you wanted to learn about a specific paper that we published, you can contact me and I might be able to give you access to it. But as a final thought, like I said, the project is starting to wind down, just because technology has moved, genetic technology has moved more towards medicine, towards traits, towards looking at DNA for health reasons. And we've sort of reached a capacity of what we can learn within the DNA molecule for ancestry. But the way we can expand it is by going to other populations that have participated. And you asked me early on, well, how can genetics tell you what is a Chamorro? Sometimes they would need to be able to work with Chamorros, but also work with other populations that are neighbors to the Chamorros, or may have some kind of connection to Chamorros, to sort of place them all in context. Comparative populations is always very important. So I encourage people to participate. If you wanted to participate on your own without going through a scientist or going through me, people can do that by purchasing a kit online. A Genographic project kit. Again, you go to genographic.com and there's buy a kit, and you can learn about yourself individually. If you wanted to participate as a community and make it part of a research project, which that would involve me, then you can contact me and we can sort of begin to see if we can sort of make something happen for the Northern Marianas.
Our guest today has been Dr. Miguel Vilar, Project Manager for National Geographic's Genographic project. Again, if you'd like to contact him to discuss about the possibility of having this expanded to the Northern Marianas, the website you want to go to is genographic.com, and his contacts are under Resources for Educators. Or if you'd like to hear more about the specific presentation on Chamorro origins, that's also available at genographic.com. Or you can contact the Northern Marianas Humanities Council for more information. Miguel, thank you so much for your time today and for coming to Saipan to share this with us, and of course for doing the research in the first place.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure. And my first time in Saipan, and I'm just wanting to return already. So
great.
Thank
You're always welcome.
Thank you.
This has been your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry.
This program was supported by a We the People grant awarded to the Northern Marianas Humanities Council from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities or the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.